The tweet was a public tweet humiliating the kingdom. And normally these channels are done privately and communications are made privately. To make a public tweet and to pick out the kingdom really alarms me. There are, Ezra, if we look at it, there are 7 billion people on this planet. About 6 billion don't enjoy what we enjoy in Canada. So there are a lot of countries, upwards of over 100 countries that do not enjoy the rights that Canadians enjoy. Why single out Saudi Arabia? We have to ask why. Ezra, I put to you the following. Mexico, Canada has, and I don't understand, but Canada has an asylum process for Mexicans. We have accepted many Mexicans under the asylum process, basically saying that the government is a threat to its people. We don't hear the Prime Minister speaking about human rights in Mexico. We don't hear about the millions that are trying to escape from Mexico and the human rights violations there. We don't hear about Iran. Iran is going through a crisis right now, and the Prime Minister is getting close to Iran. There are riots and there are protests to get some rudimentary fundamental rights in Iran, and we're silent. China, as we know, is a terrible jurisdiction when it comes to human rights, but our Prime Minister was pretty cozy with him. Yeah. The biggest one, I tweeted this, and that is Cuba. Yeah. I've gone to Cuba once, and I was heartbroken to see these beautiful 11 million people basically enslaved in a country, no freedom of speech, and their dissidents are jailed, their dissidents flogged, and some killed. But our Prime Minister is very close to Cuba. So how does this Prime Minister speak on human rights when he allows, in fact, loves jurisdictions and that are abusive to human rights, but picks out Saudi Arabia? And I think that's why Saudi Arabia moved very side.
We have an opportunity to influence and encourage change in the kingdom through education. We've been doing that. That's a missed opportunity.
Now all those students are going elsewhere. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Chatterson.
There's no doubt that the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is taking the country in the right direction, but also making major reforms on human rights and women's rights. You know, the last time I was in Saudi Arabia on a bilateral visit, I spent some time with now King Salman. We spent 15 minutes talking about women's rights. I think the Saudis respect when you take these conversations direct, face-to-face, and you do it in a respectful manner and not like a Trump-style tweet, which has obviously caused great damage to Canadian interests.
And yet the Saudis have hardened their position. Do you believe that it will make it harder for the release of those women rights activists now?
You know, I mean, I think when you just tweet and then put out statements in Arabic and don't have the courage to look at the leaders face to face. You know, Badawi obviously is a major case between Canada. When I was foreign minister, I took that case directly to senior members of the royal family. Doing it face to face is the most effective way to accomplish results, and not simply doing tweets. This is going to cause major problems for jobs in London, Ontario. It's going to cause major problems in our medical system with the 12 to 16,000 Saudi students. You know, agricultural problems, even trade investment. And what's really needed is the Prime Minister to get on a plane and get over to Riyadh and try to resolve this issue. That's in the interests of Canada and Canadian workers and the Canadian people.
To express my deep anger and sorrow for at the way proposers were treated in Iran recently. Protesters. Yes, and it's a shame that in my country people can protest only at the value of their lives. So for the first time I want to intervene as a political statement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In Iran, the mullah's policy of velayat-e-faqih, or absolute clerical rule, allows them to justify every horror, every medieval torture, every public execution, every act of terror as the will of God. For 39 years since the Iranian Revolution handed power to Ayatollah Khomeini of the detainees in Iran, the UN must raise its voice against human rights.
And that is because the human rights situation in Iran has deteriorated dramatically over the past few months. And it has further blackened a very dark picture. During the nationwide protests, more than 8,000 people were arrested, 50 people killed, 13 murdered in custody. The Iranian regime has claimed that they committed suicide in prison.
Its penal code and constitution that the mullahs have imposed on the people justifies barbaric punishments like amputations, floggings, public hangings and stoning. These atrocities are well documented by the UN Special Rapporteur on Iran.
More than 14 people were executed, and the reason for their execution, apparently, according to the regime, either they are drug addicts and they committed suicide, or they are simply people who regretted their action, and for that reason they committed suicide.
È uno dei pochi paesi del mondo che ancora applica la pena di morte ai minorenni in violazione delle leggi internazionali. I difensori dei diritti umani, gli attivisti per i diritti umani e quelli contro la pena di morte vengono considerati nemici dello Stato. Per anni ci è stato detto che una fazione moderata stava crescendo all'interno del regime. Ci è stato detto che i riformisti stavano prendendo il sopravvento.
So it is time for the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I believe it's on his agenda, to introduce
on NCRI's website, ncr-iran.org. It's a brilliant summary and analysis of the situation in Iran after the uprising.
To Syria, but also in relation to the Iranian activities there, I must emphasize, said the High Commissioner, that what we are seeing are likely war crimes and potentially crimes against humanity. The perpetrators of these crimes
about freedom and democracy in Iran, the West must stand with them. We must stand on the right side of history. The international community, pre actions and policies, it
Thank you.
And with Secretary of State Pompeo now on his right hand and his National Security Advisor John Bolton, you remember John Bolton on his left side. What do you think is going to happen to that agreement? That nuclear agreement?
And there are many more examples of the widespread corruption. Take Sadiq Laranjani, the head of Iran's judiciary. He's worth at least $300 million. He got this money from embezzling public funds into his own bank account. The Trump administration sanctioned Laranjani in January for human rights abuses because we weren't afraid to tackle the regime at its highest level. Call me crazy, you won't be the first. But I'm a little skeptical that a thieving thug under international sanctions is the right man to be Iran's highest-ranking judicial official. Former IRG officer and Minister of Interior Sadiq Masouli is nicknamed the Billionaire General. He went from being a poor IRGC officer at the end of the Iran-Iraq War to being worth billions of dollars. How'd that happen? He somehow had a knack for winning lucrative construction and oil trading contracts from businesses associated with the IRGC. Being an old college buddy of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad just might have had something to do with it as well. The Ayatollahs are in on the act too. Judging by their vast wealth, they seem more concerned with riches than religion. These hypocritical holy men have devised all kinds of crooked schemes to become some of the wealthiest men on earth while their people suffer. Grand Ayatollah Makaram Shirazi is known as the Sultan of Sugar for his illicit trading of sugar, which has generated over $100 million for him. He's pressured the Iranian government to lower subsidies to domestic sugar producers while he floods the market with his own, more expensive imported sugar. This type of activity puts ordinary Iranians out of work.